Major funding for Hitting the Road is provided by Overstock.com.
Overstock.com has launched pet adoptions.
Every year, 8 million animals are placed into adoption centers across the United States.
Our pet adoptions bring homeless animals all together in one place,
allowing you to search using the technology that powers Overstock.com.
Additional funding provided by General Atomic Sciences Education Foundation, the Calm Foundation, Delta Solutions and Strategies, Gray Line of Colorado, Northrop Grumman, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
What's in your house that was once so valuable that wars were fought over it? Roman soldiers were paid with it, and many of the words we use today were derived from it. I'll give you a hint. You can see it, you can taste it, and you even crave it. Plus, it's millions of years old. This is going to be a rock-solid episode. I'm Donna Vesey, your adventurista, and on this episode, we're hitting the road to Kansas and Utah to show you what's shaking.
I'm hitting the road again. Got adventure crawling under my skin, going places that I've never been. I'm hitting the road. I'm hitting the road again. Gonna take along all my friends, living life like there's just no end. I'm hitting the road, feeling better since I don't know when. I'm hitting the road.
I love salt, and for me, the one food I can't eat without salt, gotta be popcorn. So what's the one food you just cannot eat without salt?
Well, my great aunt salts her beer, but for me it's popcorn.
Mashed potatoes, liver.
That would have to be green beans.
Eggs.
Ham.
Eggs.
Hamburgers.
Popcorn. What's the one thing you can't eat without salt?
I would have to say everything.
Mark Bitterman is author of the book Salted and owner of Bitterman Salt Company. His research has taken him all over the world. So tell me a little bit about how the salt deposits got here.
So the salt deposits that are mined, when we're mining for a rock salt, those are actually an ancient seabed. So many, many millions of years ago, you had an ocean. Landmass would rise up sometimes where the ocean waters would recede around it, and it would leave this ocean isolated. And over the course of many thousands of years, it would evaporate off and leave this big, beautiful, thick salt deposit. That gets covered in sediments and gets subverted under the plates with tectonic activity, et cetera, et cetera. You end up with this big, huge deposit of salt deep under the earth. And it just stays there, and it gets under pressure and heat. It turns into these beautiful, clear, pink, silvery, gray, even blue crystals.
There's no better place to begin our journey than the Stratica Museum in Hutchinson, Kansas. This is one of the coolest places on Earth. It's 650 feet underground.
Well, the salt in this area, the geologists say, is about 275 million years old.
There was an ancient sea that covered about a third of the United States, covered from Nevada to Nebraska.
It was called the Permian Sea, and it was here during a time where all of the continents were kind of pressed together into a supercontinent called Pangaea.
The geologists say that this ancient sea dried up and left a layer of salt, which then contained all the minerals that were in that ancient sea. They say that then mountains washed in on top of it to where this horizontal layer of salt eventually was 5,000 feet below the surface of the earth. They say that then as the continental plates pushed on California, which pushed on Utah, this area known as Utah was squeezed in by, they say, 20 to 50 miles. And as it did, this horizontal layer of salt was squeezed up through the strata to where in this area it came within 30 feet of the surface in most of the area. And in some places it broke through to enough to where the deer and the elk found this salt. The deer and the elk led the Indians to it, so the Native Americans were chipping this salt out 1,000 years ago.
How did we find it?
That's the hard part. So the easiest way to find a salt deposit is to follow the animals. You find a deer path, you have Native American hunting and foraging expeditions that would find the salt. So it's been found forever.
Salt was originally found by animals, typically. They would start licking the ground where the salt had started to seep out or was the beginning of a vein, and then as they unearthed more and more, they would find that there could be huge veins of salt.
I think men first discovered salt in the big game animals they hunted in groups. Indeed, I've sometimes wondered if the salt that the animals ate was not more important than the meat, and the humans didn't realize it.
The first written use of salt was about 4,700 years ago. The Chinese wrote a book about medicine, Chinese medicine, and there was about 40 recipes for using salt to treat wounds, to just overall different health uses for salt.
Salt is really a very unique and necessary item. Throughout history, salt has been very important. Civilizations have depended on salt. Wars have been fought to control salt, because if an army didn't have salt, it not only couldn't provide for the nutritional needs, but nor could they preserve their food. And so salt has been valued very highly throughout civilization. At times, in some historical settings, salt was traded one for one for gold. Soldiers in ancient time often were paid part of their wages in salt.
Salt is one of the oldest commodities in the world. I mean, it was one of the first commodities to be traded and to be used as currency. So I think that's pretty amazing. I mean, they have drawings in caves where cavemen have drawn, crude salt-making techniques. So I think it's pretty important to our history.
From the beginning, salt had a tremendous economic value. And going back to the Phoenicians, international commerce from then down to the 20th century would have been impossible without salt.
Well, salt has made almost every early empire. So the Chinese used the salt to build the Great Wall of China. The Venetians used salt trade, the money from the salt trade, to build all the canals and make Venice what it is today.
So he who had the salt had the power.
Very much so. In the American Revolution, one of the chokeholds the Brits had on the American colonies was a blockade and sub-blockade of salt. In the Civil War, the Union blockade probably did as much dietary damage to the Confederacy by cutting off salt supply. Particularly the diet they fed the slaves depended on salt, depended on smoking meat, preserving meat. Because you could preserve things, salt enhanced commerce. And going back to the Phoenicians, the international commerce from then down to the 20th century would have been impossible without salt.
Well, in ancient Africa, I mean, salt was actually worth its weight in gold. So in parts of Africa, there was lots of salt, and in other parts of Africa, there was none. And so they not only would transport these large salt plates, but in further journeys, they would actually print them into coins. So it could be traded like money. But that trade still goes on today. I mean, even right now today, they strap these large salt plates onto the side of their camels and trade in sub-Saharan Africa.
Governments have used salt in several ways. Well, for one thing, by controlling production. I mean, this goes right down to the British in India and Mahatma Gandhi and the salt wars in India. You control production, you sell it and regulate it. The other thing you could do was tax salt. And because it was something everybody needed and something communities needed, you could tax it fairly high. China, the Chinese were big on that. And in France, you had something called the gabelle, the salt tax.
One of the main reasons for the French Revolution was the gabelle. The gabelle was a very high salt tax, and that was one of the main reasons why people revolted against the government. Salt played a big role in Indian independence. The British had very tight controls on salt and its distribution, and Gandhi and his followers rose up in part because of the lack of salt.
Many of the words we use today are derived from salt. Words such as salary, salad, salivate, and even salsa.
Sausage, sauce, salvation. The Old and New Testament were sealed with salt, and that's where the term salvation came from.
Well, the most famous one of all, of course, is salary, which comes from the Roman practice of actually paying their soldiers in part with salt. They called it a salarium.
Man worth his salt comes from ancient Greece. During the slave trade, they would use salt as currency to pay for the slaves. And if the slave didn't turn out very well, or if they were looking the slave over, they may say, that man's not worth his salt.
But other words like salami, salubrious, salacious are all very famous salt words. One that I've only recently learned was soused. The word soused comes from, when you souse something, you're basically pickling it. And so if you're pickled, you're soused. Around about the middle of the 1800s, a couple things happened at once. One is we started to get much larger scale industrial manufacturing happening with the Industrial Revolution. And what England started to do was take these huge coal reserves that they had up in the north and Liverpool, that whole area, and they take these huge coal reserves, pull out the coal, take the salt water from salt brines, and boil it off. And they started this gigantic industrial salt making process. And they started making salt that was so readily available, they ship it all around the world as ballast for their ships. They just load up the ship that was empty, which is very hard to sail, by the way. They wobble and tip over. You fill it up with salt, you ship it someplace, and you say, give me all your meat, give me your pork, your fish, your food, your dyes, your textiles, your gold, and we'll give you our salt. And people's like, that's a fantastic deal.
What are some of the different ways salt is processed?
So the two primary ways that salt's made is from evaporation. So you take either salt water that comes from the ocean or a spring or a natural well, or you do it by mining for it. So there's the two basic ways. You either dig into the earth and find salt in its already crystalline form, or you form crystals by evaporating it out of the ocean.
Another technique, or the most popular technique for gourmet salt, would be just dehydrate solar mining, solar evaporation ponds. So what you would do is just take ocean water, bring it into a multi-stage pond. First pond removes some of the chemicals maybe that you don't want to eat, and as you get along further in the ponds to the final pond, that's where you would get edible sea salt.
The operation here at Redmond is very simple. The entire operation, the entire manufacturing process, from the way the salt sits in the mine until you get it in the shaker for you to eat, you could do with a hammer out of your toolbox and the screen out of your kitchen window. We crush it and we screen it. We don't remove anything, we don't add anything. The salt here at Redmond doesn't come out of the ground white. It doesn't look like what most people think salt looks like. Because of all these minerals that are with the salt comes out with a reddish pink color with specks of gray and black due to all of the minerals.
Tell me the process of getting salt out of the ground.
We'll start by going underground from about 100 to 400 feet in depth. And the first process there is to drill a shot out. Once it's drilled out, we load it with explosives, make that detonation, and then come back in and load it on 60-ton trucks and haul it to the surface. From the surface, we're dumping it into crushers, and it goes through a series of different size crushers and screens until it becomes the product that it's going to be, whether it's a 30-pound chunk or a half-inch chunk of granular.
Salt from the mining process can be used for very many things. Animal feed is one of the biggest. Ice control on roads is really big. It can also be used in chemical process. Chlorine is made from salt. Aluminum is purified with rock salt.
Another thing happened in the mid to late 1800s is we developed these processes called the Solvay process and the chloralkali process. These are two key processes that break the sodium chloride ions. So salt is sodium chloride. They learned how to break the sodium and the chloride apart and start manufacturing chemicals with them. And they have a million different things that they make out of it. And today, I think there's 14,000 different industrial products made from salt. So there are millions upon millions of tons of salt manufactured every single year. The vast majority of that salt is going to the chemical industry and for road de-icing and for huge industrial markets. A tiny sliver of that salt goes off and is packaged up as food.
The most fascinating thing for me about salt is the thousands and thousands of uses, from table salt to salt scrubs, road salt. Virtually every type of manufacturing process uses salt in some manner.
We all know that salt is important to enhance the flavor of our food. What we don't often think about is the delicate balance of too much and too little salt in our bodies.
All human beings and animals need salt in their diet. It's a very important essential element to the body. We find through a complex network of cellular structures and hormones that sodium helps regulate volume status, blood pressure, conduction through nerves and muscles.
And it's kind of interesting that it's been demonized nowadays. But the truth is, you have to eat salt every single day. If you don't eat salt, actually, you get hyponatremia and you die.
Well, hyponatremia can manifest itself through several different forms, whether they're very general symptoms such as fatigue, nausea, muscle twitching, and then you can have some severe symptoms such as confusion, seizures, and even coma.
Very low sodium diets have actually shown to be dangerous. So we eat salt really primarily as a dietary supplement. We have to have it.
We can lose salt through dehydration, so perhaps exercising. We can lose it through gastrointestinal losses such as nausea, vomiting. There are other conditions such as kidney disease and heart disease that also can lead to salt loss. And sometimes we can have a low sodium balance just due to drinking too much water.
Is it possible to eat too much salt?
It is possible. The thing is that your natural reaction to having consumed salt, if you eat it in excess, you're going to become thirsty. Your body triggers it right away. So your kidneys are very, very powerful mechanisms, and what they're telling you is we need some water to process this salt.
Well, we find that too much salt can actually increase your blood pressure and lead to syndromes like hypertension.
It's not so much that salt is bad, it's that there is already a lot of hidden salt in the processed foods that we buy.
There are a lot of products that have hidden sodium in them, such as like frozen meals, canned goods, soups, condiments, ketchup, mustard, even bread and cereal have some hidden sodium in them.
So too much salt is a bad thing, yet we need salt to survive. So what does this mean for salt? Does it have a good or bad reputation? Is it safe to say that salt is good for you?
Salt is good for you, but in moderation.
How does it change the taste of food?
So that's a tricky thing because salt by itself, by the way, you don't have any aroma. So most of the foods that you taste, you're actually getting most of the flavor through your nose. You don't realize it because it comes up through the back of your nose and you're going, and your brain processes it like it's in your mouth. Sort of like the way your brain takes two pictures when you're looking out of your two eyes and turns it into one. Your brain does the exact same thing with flavor. It composes flavor from your nose and your mouth into one thing. So salt is something that interacts only with your mouth, not with your nose at all. And what it does is, for one thing, is it breaks apart proteins in food and converts them into more flavor-available amino acids. So something that might taste dull and drab, you actually make flavor with the salt. In addition to that, it interacts with your tongue and it stimulates your tongue in ways that actually enhance its receptivity to different things, so it makes things taste more vibrant and alive. So it actually builds flavor and then makes you taste it more fully. My favorite question is what's the best kind of salt to use at home? This makes me laugh every time because what you read about in food magazines, what you see on TV, and what you're told about from professional chefs and the celebrity chefs is you should use kosher salt. And it's really become the most popular salt for kind of like food-centric people and foodies and cooks. But the interesting thing is it's the wrong salt. It makes me laugh because kosher salt is a refined chemical. It's just pure artificial sodium chloride, which is really not a natural food. Salt in its natural state has all these different minerals. The salt mines up there in Utah have all these different minerals. The salts that are pulled from the sea as natural sea salts like fleur de sel and sel gris. These are beautiful salts that have tons of minerals, they always have. So kosher salt has none. And so I always like to advocate use a natural whole salt.
I know what foods I like to salt, But to really understand the relationship between the two, it takes an expert like Chef Bradford Heap. I met Chef Bradford Heap at his restaurant and learned how the use of salt in cooking changes everything. Salt is so important to him, he named his restaurant for it.
It's the one property that can universally make food taste better.
Okay, so tell me, how does salt enhance the flavor of food? What's going on there?
Well, there's a scientific reaction. It brings up the perception of glutamate, which is a kind of a property that's in meats. It's also a principal flavor in umami, is that perception. It's got like a brothy, kind of woodsy flavor. So it just enhances and brings up flavor and everything. We're also pre-programmed in our reptilian brain to have this love of salt, and that's what makes us walk for miles, because we need it to live. If we don't have salt in our system, we cease to exist. One of the beautiful things of salt is just to learn how it was used to preserve food. And this is in the time before we had any refrigeration. So obviously, salting the food has a bacteriostatic, that is to say, it's not a great atmosphere for the bugs to live in. They all die off. Today we're going to be using this duck. It's going to pull the moisture out of the duck, and it's going to replace it with the sodium chloride. So it's a preservation technique. And so the first step that we're going to do is we're going to trim the extra fat off of this duck leg. I'm going to have you prepare our cure. So we're going to dry cure the duck. So if you want to take the time, and this is about a cup of salt and a half a cup of sugar, and throw the thyme and the salt and the sugar together in that bowl.
All of this together?
All of it together.
The entire?
The entire amount.
Okay.
So it's basically 2/3 salt, 1/3 sugar. And then if you want to take these
peppercorns?
Yeah, this can go right in. The thyme can go in. I think
Do we have
you've got enough there.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not a. The biggest part of this recipe is the ratio of salt to sugar.
Okay.
So we're going to add the coriander into our spice grinder. And this, like I say, is not a hard and fast rule. And then I'm going to have you break up the bay leaves and put those in, and I'm going to start cleaning this duck up a little bit. This technique, duck confit, originated in the south of France. So we almost have this set. Oh, this looks so good.
You want to smell this? That's wonderful.
Oh, so I've got to ask you, what does that smell like? There's one principal smell that I smell.
Fruit Loops.
There you go. We're going to add the duck in there. We're just going to kind of stir it around in there. There's no rhyme or reason. We just want to get it all coated in there. So that's going to start right away. It's going to start pulling the moisture out of the product and replacing it through osmosis with that saline.
Okay.
Now I'm going to do a little razzle-dazzle on this one. Not that you didn't do a great job, but we just want to make sure that we're completely coated in here. So we're just going to toss it real nice so we have it all sides coated. Now this product is going to go into the refrigerator, and we're going to cure this product for maybe 6 to 8 hours. It's not like I have a cauldron of boiling fat. Oh, I do have a cauldron of boiling fat. So just coming out of the oven.
Wow. Okay, it's still cooking.
Yeah, so it's been in the oven for about 2.5 hours, and it's gotten very tender. Not only is salt the most important mineral and condiment that I use in this restaurant, it's wonderful for preserving food. It has a way of enhancing flavor in everything we do, and it's also nutritionally necessary for us to have a healthy life. I mean, I have been just having such a great time in my kitchen exploring the uses of all these different salts and the different properties that they bring to our cooking.
How I discovered salt. I was a saltaholic. I put salt on pizza, I put salt on everything. And I went into a gourmet food shop, and it had this little tiny jar of fleur de sel for $20, and I laughed and I thought, well, now there's a marketing gimmick if I've ever seen one. I'm gonna buy it. So I bought it, I put it on my food, and I went, this is the biggest discovery of my life. This is the greatest thing ever. I can't believe it. I started sharing it with friends. We started pinching little bits out and putting it in bags and everything else. I thought, there's got to be other salts. If it can't just be France. There's got to be other salts in the world. I went out to find every salt in the world that was like that.
Well, and when I first discovered salt, I wasn't there was no such thing as a foodie back then. And I tasted the salt, and I ran out on my motorcycle. I guess I rode out on my motorcycle, and I met a salt maker, and I was amazed by his history and connection to the earth, and his connection to the sea, and his connection to history. And I was just really struck by it. And ever since then, wherever I've traveled, I've met people that are beautiful, living amazing lives, doing with amazing foods. And this salt has been this kind of gateway and connection to all of those people. So I love how salt is this connector between cultures and places and people and time. And it's been something that's just excited me for my whole life.
Are we going to run out of salt?
No. Luckily, we're not going to run out of salt. So the salt deposits that we're exploiting nowadays for rock salts, those are already in and of themselves ginormous, huge deposits that could take centuries, even millennia to exhaust.
Absolutely not. There's still millions and millions and millions of tons that are locked up in the ground, but the ocean is just an inexhaustible supply of salt. It's more than we could ever use in 1,000 lifetimes.
The ocean has an inexhaustible supply of salt. There are billions upon billions upon trillions of tons of salt in the ocean. And by the way, when we take it out of the ocean and we use it, most of it ends up going back into the ocean again anyway, so it's kind of recycled.
We will never run out of salt.
Salt is crazy good.
Salt is crazy good.
I'm hitting the road again. Got adventure crawling under my skin. Going places that I've never been. I'm hitting the road. I'm hitting the road again. Gonna take along all my friends. Living life like it's just no end. I'm hitting the road. Feeling better since I don't know